protein intake. So the RDA for protein intake is about 1.8 grams per kilogram body weight, right? And I always thought that was enough. I thought that was enough because you don't, I think people are meeting that. You don't want too much protein because then you can start to get into, the IGF-1 arm where if you're not physically active, you're activating growth pathways that could allow damaged cells to become cancerous, form tumors, things like that, right? But until I talked to Stu Phillips, had him on my podcast, he and others have shown that the tools that were used to come up with that RDA are way out of date. Like everything, it takes so long to get things updated. You make a rule and then new data comes in and then that rule just lingers for 10 years or you're like, why are we still doing this thing that we know isn't right? Doesn't make sense anymore. Well, there's new tools where essentially the protein losses were basically, at the time, I think they were underestimated. Have I got that correctly? So in other words, they were underestimated, whereas actually you're actually losing more amino acids. And so you actually need more protein to replenish those losses of just normal steady state living. And then you add on top of that working out where you're actually stressing your muscles, then you need even more. And so some of their research indicates that 0.8, not 1.8. I totally got that wrong. 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight is the RDA, not 1.8. Please make sure that's noted. So 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight is the RDA. It's more like 1.6 grams per kilogram body weight is what's just needed to not lose muscle mass.
Wow.
Which is a lot higher than the RDA. And then when you talk about training and stuff, you can go maybe even a little bit above that, up to 2 grams per kilogram body weight. If you're some elite level bodybuilder, I mean, maybe more, but I don't, then you're just you're getting to little bits, right? Of, getting a little bit of more benefit out of it. So I think that's another thing. I've really changed my mind. I've really been a lot more cognizant on my protein intake and instead of having a smoothie for a midday snack alone, I'll have some salmon or some sardines or some source of protein. Oftentimes it ends up being fish, but leftovers as my snack. So it's okay, because I do end up working out a lot, even if I'm only doing a quick 20-minute HIIT or something. I'm doing something each day. And so it's getting that protein has become a lot more important. And I think it is really important because muscle mass it's hugely important as we age for frailty. It becomes a big risk for falling, breaking something. And also just once you get to that point, it's kind of I forgot who, I think it was Brad Schoenfeld who came up with this analogy and I love it. So he gets credit for it. But it's kind of like a retirement fund, right? So you want to put in what you can earlier in life to build that muscle mass, because once you reach a certain age, when you get to 50, it becomes harder to gain muscle mass. I mean, strength, you can still pull that lever a bit if you work at it, but it's not as easy to gain muscle mass, and you're pulling from it a lot more. And so you want to build that reserve up before you get to that point so that you have more to work with, right? Just like a retirement fund, you want to contribute, because once you start to get to the age where you can't work anymore, you want to retire, that's your funds. You have what you have, and then you're going to be pulling from it, right? As a woman as well, it's bone mass is also into that whole factor where you want to buy in earlier. You want to build your bone mass, build your muscle mass, because once you start to hit your 50 and you get to 60, really, then, it just kind of gets worse and worse where you're going to be pulling from that. So you want to really focus on muscle mass because of this, what I would say Stu Phillips has sort of coined as what's called it's the disability threshold. So, a lot of animal studies that have been done on this protein stuff. And I bought into this as a scientist. I did research in the aging field for a long time, very familiar with the researchers and all the studies out there doing studies on how low protein intake can extend lifespan in rodents. It can extend health span, what's called health span. So they're less likely to get cardiovascular disease and, cancer and things like that. But you have to realize that animals are in a sterile environment. These they're not being exposed to influenza and, and all the respiratory diseases and everything out there, right?
I have just launched my signature truffles with Thrive Market. So these are low sugar. In fact, they're actually keto friendly. They're sweetened with allulose, utilizing ethically sourced cacao, and also using hazelnut butter to give it a really well-rounded taste. So 2 different flavors. There is a hazelnut pecan crunch, which literally has a crunch to it. It's like velvety smooth, but then when you bite into it, you get the crunch in there as well. And a hazelnut mocha flavor for those that like that little coffee bite to it as well. So these things are completely low carb. There's only a tiny, tiny bit of sugar in them to begin with. The primary sweetener is allulose, and everything else is ethically sourced. So I partnered up with Thrive because we've worked on products together, but it was finally time for us to actually create a product that has the DeLauer signature on it. So that link down below saves you 30% off your whole grocery order through Thrive Market, but you're more than welcome to apply that 30% off to these truffles as well, which are priced at $10.99, so they're not too bad to begin with, but then when you apply that 30%, it's even better. Plus, you get a free $60 gift whenever you sign up with Thrive Market as well. So that link is down below in the top line of the description underneath this video.
They're not, it's not like a human who's like 70 or 80 where you got like something that gets you in the hospital and you're then, bedridden for a couple of weeks. You lose enormous amounts of muscle mass that you'll never gain back. And I've seen it like personally from my own family member. And I know a lot of people have seen this where it's like a family member's older, they go in for a surgery or they go in for like they're in the hospital because they're like really sick and then they lose all this muscle mass and then they just can't really walk as well as they used to. And it starts to go down this trajectory of exponential just down. And that's really where like the more muscle mass you have to start, you have to go and you're convalescing for a couple of weeks. You're not using your muscles. If you have more to pull from, and also it's easier to kind of gain back some of that strength too, then you're in so much better shape. And that's kind of for me where it was like, some of these animal studies aren't really that relevant because of that. Like there's that aspect of like, just being exposed to diseases that really get us in trouble or even just a surgery, something that where you're not going to be moving around for a month. And when you're like 75, 80 years old, like that's really impactful on like your quality of life and also on just your future trajectory of aging. So I think the protein intake then has become a little more important. Now, again, if you're not physically active, I don't know that you need to be like consuming massive protein bars and whey protein shakes and all that. Like you need to like lose your weight, and also just being physically active is important. Like you need to incorporate those amino acids into muscle.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're not, then you are potentially activating growth pathways like IGF-1 that can allow damaged cells to not die when they otherwise would.
Yeah, I think Dr. Don Layman, had mentioned that he estimates that about like 70 to 75% of it is the stimulus. Like get the stimulus first. That's like first and foremost, obviously. And he's coming out of a protein lab, right? So, he's definitely telling us that protein's important. And, these sentiments are definitely echoing things that he said. But he said, at the end of the day, like first and foremost, like if you don't have the stimulus, and then same, you look at the longevity research, it's like the longevity research that does incorporate stimulus shows otherwise, that protein is important. Whereas if you're not, again, looking at a rodent model study and you're looking at, methionine's an issue and all this and that, you're like, okay, yeah, when there's no stimulus and when there's no like additional taxation on the body. So I think there's context definitely needs to be had.
Right. Not to mention these mice are largely like sedentary. Like if you put an exercise wheel on them, the only exercise wheels I've seen in little animal cages in a lot of these labs is when they're doing exercise studies. They don't usually have exercise wheels. It's really unfortunate, to be honest, because if you do put an exercise wheel, the mice, they'll just naturally want to run, like they feel better.
Yeah.
So these mice are sedentary. They're largely sedentary, and you're just like, of course, if you take away all that protein, it's just not the same. Yeah. It's just not the same. So you get a human who's physically active. Do they need to be protein restricting? I don't think so. I think that's probably counterproductive. Yeah. So there's like mixed signals coming in from, because you have this science out there going, oh, protein restriction improves longevity, at least in rodents, and here's all these mechanisms. But then again, it's like, well, these are like sedentary mice that are, not being exposed to influenza. Yeah, it's like, I don't know. There's a lot of different factors here, right?
Same, yeah.